Right now, you are probably planning your next meal. You woke up, grabbed a quick breakfast, and now your brain is quietly counting down the hours until lunch, knowing that dinner is waiting for you at the finish line. It feels like basic human biology, like breathing or blinking, but it isn't. This rigid, everyday schedule of breakfast, lunch, and dinner is entirely made up. It's an invisible clock dictating your life, and it's way older than you think. Older than the steam engine, older than the printing press, and baked so deeply into our culture that we forgot we invented it. The question is, when did we figure this out, and why exactly did 3 become a magic number? To understand how strange our modern schedule really is, we have to go back to the beginning. Go back roughly 1 million years. Way back to early humans, specifically Homo erectus. These early human ancestors did something that completely changed the trajectory of life on Earth. They figured out how to control fire, and we actually have proof of this sitting in places like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Fire meant cooking. Cooking unlocked massive amounts of calories in tough meat and bitter root vegetables. This allowed our digestive tracts to shrink and our brains to massively grow. But they did not have a concept of lunch, or dinner, or even mealtime. Early humans were strictly opportunistic eaters. They ate when they found food, and they didn't eat when they didn't. If a hunting party took down a large animal, they might gorge themselves for 2 days straight. If the hunt failed, they might spend the afternoon casually grazing on wild berries, nuts, and tubers as they walked. There was no schedule, just survival. That biological flexibility is actually our species' ultimate superpower. It is exactly why humans can survive in the freezing Arctic and the scorching Sahara. Your body doesn't strictly need 3 meals a day to function. It just needs a certain amount of energy. The idea of sitting down at a designated hour to consume a designated portion of food would seem completely insane to our ancestors. They listened to their stomachs. They didn't follow schedules. Now, let's fast forward to ancient Rome. If you walked into the bustling streets of Rome in the 1st century AD, right at the height of the empire, and asked a local for a good spot to grab a midday lunch, you'd be laughed straight out of the forum. The Romans were deeply suspicious of overeating. Medical writers of the time believed that eating more than once a day was physically terrible for digestion. But more importantly, it was viewed as a glaring sign of gluttony. A true, respectable Roman citizen ate exactly 1 massive meal a day. They called it the cena. It happened around 4 in the afternoon. It was an epic, sprawling event that could last for hours. Sure, soldiers on march or manual laborers moving stone might grab a quick handful of bread, cheese, and olives in the early morning. They called that the irontaculum. But for a polite society, breakfast was practically a moral failing. Eating early in the day meant you couldn't control your primal animal urges. Think about that. The greatest military empire of the ancient world conquered the Mediterranean on what we would now call an extreme intermittent fasting schedule. Same. Yeah, I'd probably just wait for the afternoon feast, too. Then the empire falls. The Middle Ages roll in across Europe. Now, the daily clock isn't set by emperors or gladiators. It's set by the Catholic Church. In medieval Europe, the rhythm of life was dictated by monks, local priests, and the ringing of church bells. Fasting was a huge part of daily religious life. Eating anything before morning mass was strictly forbidden. You literally had to wait for the religious services to end to break your fast, which is exactly where the English word breakfast comes from. But even then, 3 meals wasn't the standard. Most people ate 2. They had a heavy dinner right in the middle of the day, usually around noon. They needed the raw calories to work the fields until sunset. Then they had a lighter supper right before bed to hold them over through the long, dark night. Breakfast was still viewed with intense suspicion. The famous 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas actually wrote that eating too early in the day was a sin of gluttony. Breakfast was strictly reserved for children, the elderly, or sick people who physically couldn't survive without it. If you were a healthy adult sneaking a piece of meat or bread at 8 in the morning, your neighbors thought you were fundamentally weak. So when did breakfast start to become normal? In the 16th and 17th centuries. Global trade is exploding. European explorers and merchants are crossing the oceans. And suddenly, a wild new stimulant hits the European market. Caffeine, coffee from the Middle East, tea from China and cacao from the Americas start flooding into major cities. Wealthy Europeans became utterly obsessed with morning drinks. But you can't just drink highly caffeinated, bitter coffee on a completely empty stomach. You need a pastry. You need a little toast. You need sugar. Overnight, breakfast stopped being a guilty secret for the weak. It became a luxury experience for the rich. Having the time and money to sit down for a sweet morning meal meant you were somebody. Wealthy estates even began building specialized breakfast rooms just to show off this new morning ritual. By the time the Tudors were ruling England, breakfast was cementing itself as a totally normal, respectable way to start the day. So where did eating 3 times a day come from? It started in the 18th century. The Industrial Revolution. This is the moment humanity stopped using the sun for time and moved to using the clock. Before this, you worked when it was light outside, and you slept when it was dark. Now, you are working in a massive, deafening factory, and the machines do not care about the sun. The machines run on steam, and the factory bosses needed a way to keep thousands of human workers energized without slowing down the assembly line. You have to clock in by 8 a.m., which means you need to eat before you leave the house. Breakfast becomes mandatory fuel just to survive the morning shift. Then, the boss blows a whistle at noon. You get exactly 1 hour to rest and eat. You can't go all the way home for a massive medieval-style dinner. You need something fast, cheap, and portable. A meat pie, some bread and cheese. Street vendors started setting up carts directly outside factory gates just to feed the masses. This is the birth of the modern lunch. The word lunch actually derives from luncheon, an old word for a thick, rough chunk of bread or meat. It was quite literally a fast food break designed to keep you standing at your station. Finally, you clock out at 5 or 6 p.m. You go home, exhausted. The noon meal was just a snack, so now you need serious calories. You sit down with your family for the biggest, most relaxing meal of the day. Dinner has officially moved to the evening. So now, here's the full summary. Our earliest ancestors grazed whenever they found food. The ancient Romans shamed anyone who ate more than once. The Middle Ages ran on a strict 2-meal system dictated by church bells. The Renaissance turned morning caffeine into a wealthy status symbol. And finally, the Industrial Revolution forced us all to eat on a factory whistle schedule. The next time you look at the clock and realize you're getting hungry right at noon, remember that it's not just your biology talking. It's history. You are feeling the echoes of Victorian factory owners and medieval monks dictating when you're allowed to be hungry. Food is just fuel. But time? Time is the invisible cage we build around it. If you found this fascinating, stick around and check out our other videos. We've got plenty more human history to unpack.